What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Alright guys, so we are going to continue our coverage over the Trial of X era of X-Men comics, where we actually do pick up with X-Men number 3. Now remember, this is the latest X-Men series that currently came out back in 2021. Now remember, this comes after Jonathan Hickman had basically left the X-Men titles. Now at this point in Marvel Comics, even though he stopped writing the main X-Men book, he did have a couple more X-Men books that we're going to cover down the road in later videos. But for right now, at this point, the main flagship book went over to Gary Dugan. Now, with that being said, we have covered the first two X-Men books written by Gary Dugan, and this is the third one that is continuing this idea that something big is about to happen to Earth. And it all comes down to the X-Men to basically save it. Now, with that being said, when it comes to Gary Dugan and Jonathan Hickman, they are different writers when it comes to how to write the X-Men. And what I mean by that is, when it came to Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run, he had different stories in every single book, meaning that you had different characters for each book when it came to his X-Men run, all 21 issues. But when it came to Gary Dugan's X-Men book, his is more of kind of like, I have a set of characters for every single book, because this is going to be the X-Men team. And this X-Men team was given to us in the middle of the Hellfire Gala event to basically say, we're going back to the old ways when it comes to X-Men comics. And not completely, but more of kind of like, if I say we have an X-Men book, we should have an X-Men team. And so that is where we have Gary Dugan's X-Men team at. Now, when it comes to his X-Men team, you have Cyclops, Jean Grey, Rogue, Synch, Wolverine, but it's X-23 Wolverine, and also Sunfire. Oh, I forgot Polaris as well, which honestly, I don't know why I always forget about her, but either way, that is your X-Men team right there. And so getting into today's storyline, we actually do pick up with the X-Men right now, getting ready for a big arrival to the planet. And what I mean by that is you do have Sword basically call up the X-Men. Now remember, when it comes to Sword is kind of like S.H.I.E.L.D., but for space. Meaning that their goal is to make sure that if anything is traveling to Earth, they're the first ones to hear about it and figure out who or what is traveling to the Earth. And so right now, you do have Sword calling up the X-Men and saying, you guys have a big arrival coming to the planet Earth, and they want to talk to the X-Men. Now, with that being said, we come to find out that basically it is the High Evolutionary. Now, the High Evolutionary is kind of like what you saw back in the Guardians of Galaxy Volume 3, where basically you have a guy who's really big on evolution. Now, with that being said, though, I'm pretty sure his origin is a tad bit different than what you saw in the movie lining up to the comic books. Either way, though, like I said, he's really big on evolution to the point he left Earth and made his own kind of planet and his own kind of evolution of creatures on that planet that he had went to. Now, when it comes to the High Evolutionary, he did not come back to Earth alone. He also brought his daughter, and I'm going to actually butcher her name, so please forgive me, but her name is Luminius. Either way, though, they came back to Earth because they heard what the mutants did with Arakko and Mars. Because you have to remember that when it came to the X-Men in the earlier parts of Jonathan Hickman's work on the X-Men books, matter of fact, right in the middle of the Hellfire Gala event, the X-Men have basically moved the second island known as Arakko all the way over to Mars and turned Mars into a planet that is actually livable. And so for the High Evolutionary, he looks at that as a great achievement for the mutant race. Because we have to remember that when it comes to the humans have been on Earth for years on years on years, and they really haven't done anything that great to show off to the rest of the universe. And so when it comes to the mutants, doing what the humans could not do was a very huge thing to talk about across the universe. They turned another planet into their own. And so this is now the High Evolutionary wanting to offer the mutant race, but also the human race, a way to save the Earth. Because thanks to humans, the climate of Earth is technically wrecked. Like sooner or later, the human race is going to go extinct thanks to what we have done to the climate of the Earth. And so this is the High Evolutionary saying, I have a way to basically help you guys save your planet and save your race. So would you accept my gift? Now, because the High Evolutionary does have a history with Rogue, you have Rogue literally say no just like that. And what I mean by that is you do have Rogue actually punch the mess out of the High Evolutionary. Because again, he had kidnapped her in the past. And when you kidnap Rogue and you do bad things to Rogue, she's going to hold a grudge against you for a very long time. Now, with that being said, though, you also have Luminius step in. And she asks the rest of the X-Men, basically, does Rogue answer for you guys as well? Because my father is giving you guys a chance to save your planet, to save your people, to save technically everything of Earth. And you have Polaris also punch the daughter of the High Evolutionary. Because to Polaris, if Rogue says let's fight, then the X-Men say let's fight as well. And so now we have this big battle because what the High Evolutionary did to Rogue years ago. And so the next few pages are honestly a big battle between the X-Men and the High Evolutionary. Now, when it comes to this battle between the two sides, I do want to point out a few things here. And the first thing I do want to point out is the huge difference between Synch and Rogue, because you have the High Evolutionary actually very intrigued to Synch. And the reason why, because when it comes to Synch, he may seem very similar to Rogue, but there is a huge difference. When it comes to Rogue, Rogue basically does take your powers away. And so when she touches you, she does absorb your powers and basically use your powers. Now, in some cases, you may keep your powers after she touches you, but you're in a weaker state. When it comes to Synch, though, he copies your power, meaning that he's not taking away your powers. He's just cloning your powers and making it his own temporarily. And so you have Synch right now doing that with Sunfire. And so when he does use Sunfire's powers on the High Evolutionary, you have the High Evolutionary realize how powerful Synch is. He even says, you're way more powerful than Rogue is. And that right there makes you even more interesting. On top of that, he wants a sample of Synch's blood. Now, as the battle goes on, we also learn a tad bit more about Synch and his abilities, because you still have some people out there still actually think that when it comes to Synch, he can only copy the powers of mutants and that is it. But in the earlier books of this series, we did learn that when it comes to Synch, he actually has the ability to copy other people's powers, even if they're not a mutant at all. So if the Human Torch does fly by, then Synch would be able to actually copy the powers of the Human Torch. Now, with that being said, though, you have the High Evolutionary realize that Synch was able to copy the powers of his daughter. Now, of course, when it comes to anybody being on the side of the High Evolutionary, 9 out of 10 times, he gave those people their powers, which means that he can easily shut down their powers. And so we do see that when it comes to his daughter, you do have the High Evolutionary shut off her powers, which means that Synch is no longer able to use her powers. Now, you then have the High Evolutionary say that he will basically leave the Earth and stop fighting against the X-Men if he's able to get a sample of Synch's blood. Now, at first, you have the X-Men say no, but then they realize that honestly, they do not stand a chance at all against the High Evolutionary. And so you do have Synch basically cut himself on the finger or the claw of X-23 and gives a blood sample over to the High Evolutionary to basically end the battle. And you do have the High Evolutionary actually leave and go away. Now, after the High Evolutionary left the Earth, he did have a conversation with Jean Grey. Now, this conversation was really more of the High Evolutionary telling Jean Grey who was responsible for the attacks on Earth in the earlier parts of this series. Because remember, in the earlier parts of the X-Men series, this current series, Earth been attacked twice now, but the X-Men have no idea who had basically attacked the Earth. And so what is the High Evolutionary doing right now is telling Jean Grey who is responsible by saying that it was Cordyceps Jones. Now remember, Cordyceps Jones is basically this fungi that had gained intelligence, but either way though, he took over something called Game World. Now Game World was the spaceship that would fly around the universe, attack different planets, but the people on Game World would basically take bets to figure out how would the people of the world they're attacking would do against an attack like this. Would they survive or would they die? And so you have the people of Game World take bets on the people on the outcome of their planet surviving or dying. Now, with all that being said, though, when it comes to the High Evolutionary, he's telling Jean Grey, yeah, it was Cordyceps Jones in Game World. And you have the High Evolutionary tell Jean Grey that he feels kind of bad for Cordyceps Jones. And the reason why, because when it comes to Game World and Cordyceps Jones, they were supposed to be the next step in the evolution of Mojoverse. And what he means is that when it comes to Mojoverse, Mojoverse is actually this dimension where basically everything's entertainment. So anything they do in that dimension is just a way of entertainment. And they actually televise almost everything they do for, once again, entertainment. And so this is the High Evolutionary saying Game World was supposed to be the next step in the evolution from Mojoverse, but something happened. Either way, though, you didn't have Jean Grey tell Cyclops everything she learned from the High Evolutionary, but it's Jean Grey and Cyclops realizing that the X-Men team is going to have to split up into two teams for the time being to be able to actually stop Cordyceps Jones. And so you have Jean Grey and Cyclops begin the process of actually playing rock, paper, scissors to figure out who is going with who for this next mission against Cordyceps Jones. Now that is the moment where we actually jump over and see two characters actually teaming up for, of course, to go after the mutant race. And those two characters are Peter Gyrich and also Kelvin Hing. Now when it comes to Peter Gyrich is an old character, been around for a very long time. And usually he's always trying to find a way to go after the X-Men and the mutant race and to hopefully get rid of them. Now, with that being said right now, though, he's also part of Orchid. Now, when it comes to Orchid is a new organization that was made by Jonathan Hickman. And basically, Orchid is this organization that's made up of people from other organizations who have came together for one particular goal, to get rid of the mutant race. And of course, Peter Gyrich had joined that group because he wants to get rid of the mutant race. Now, when it comes to Kelvin is a tad bit different. He wants to get payback against the mutant race only because what happened back in Planet-Size X-Men #1, which was that the X-Men took Arakko and moved Arakko to Mars. Now, when the X-Men actually did that, though, it hurt other companies out there who were trying to do the same thing. And so when the X-Men did that, a lot of those companies lost a lot of money building up toward the idea of actually being able to make Mars into a planet that is actually livable. Because then the mutants came out of nowhere and just said, hey, we took our second island, we put it on Mars, and by the way, Mars is now a planet where people can live on. And that hurt a lot of companies, including Kelvin Hing. He's one of the characters who was trying to actually accomplish that goal for the human race, to have people live on Mars. And so this is Peter Gyrich saying, listen, even though the mutants have technically put their second island on Mars, us humans have to get there as well. And so it's Peter Gyrich saying, I want you to basically begin the process of putting humans on Mars, because if you do that for us, that can lead into something great for us down the road. But then we pick up with Ben Urich. Now, Ben Urich is an old character, old character, been around for a very long time. And usually when it comes to Ben Urich, he's one of the best reporters for the Daily Bugle or Frontline, depending who he's working for. Either way, though, he's a great reporter. And right now, you have Ben Urich basically right now meeting up with somebody. Now, when he does, this person is telling Ben Urich something very important about the X-Men and the mutant race. And what he's telling Ben Urich is the resurrection process. Remember, when it comes to the X-Men, they now have the ability to come back to life. Now, it's not like they're really coming back to life. It's really more of them getting a clone body, and then Charles Xavier or someone else download your memories into your new clone body. And so with that, is someone telling Ben Urich, you need to look in this right here. Because I watched you yesterday or earlier this week when you were talking to Cyclops. Here's some pictures real quick. Cyclops died a few months ago. How can somebody die a few months ago but be able to actually come back to life so easily? Because remember, back in House of X and Power of X, Cyclops did die, but that was when we learned about the resurrection process. And so whoever this guy is, he's basically telling Ben Urich, look at this right here. People are dying in the mutant race, but then they're able to come back to life so easily. How is that possible? Ben Urich, you need to look into this and tell the world that the X-Men basically have a way to bring people back to life, but they're not sharing that technology with the rest of the world. And that right there is going to be very important. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So with that being said, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. Also, if you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.